you have a love scene between a human woman and a sea creature.
Yes.
Were you worried when you shot that it would be completely ridiculous? Because, I mean...
Always.
Yeah.
Every day.
I was watching some Guillermo del Toro interviews when I came across his December appearance on Jimmy Kimmel, in which he said something rather profound.
But you know, failure and success live next door to each other, and they have no numbers at the door. They just knock.
This hit me pretty hard considering it is January and the usual New Year's resolution thoughts of self-improvement are at the forefront of my mind. Del Toro's statement is very true, especially for any type of artist who puts their work out for others to see. You never really know how it's going to be received. You can pour your heart and soul into something and people may very well hate it. No amount of hard work you put into your art has any influence on whether it's going to resonate with an audience. But when I went to see his most recent film, something really interesting happened. Going to the theater is a gamble as far as whether the audience is going to be annoying as hell or not, but when I went to see The Shape of Water, not only did I love the film, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was in a room full of people who were thoroughly engaged with what they were watching. I mean, a lady did sex with a fish man, and everyone was totally there for it. The audience broke into enthusiastic applause as the credits rolled, and that's no small achievement for a film that's entirely original. Yeah, people applauded when I saw Star Wars and every time I've gone to see a DC film, oddly enough, but it was the kind of applause that those films always get. It's the nostalgia clap, the I know these characters and that makes me feel good clap. Look, I get it, I applaud whenever John Williams is even mentioned, it's just a reflex. But this kind of applause was something very special. It was for an original film with characters nobody had any nostalgic attachment to. It was just so good that everyone felt compelled to put their hands together. As it turns out, it wasn't just my theater that loved the film. The Shape of Water has done well with both critics and audiences alike. It even won some Golden Globes, one of which was for Best Director. And by the way, if you have not watched Del Toro's acceptance speech, please do. That shit made me cry. The premise of this film doesn't sound like it would end up working as perfectly as it does, and that's partially what Del Toro is referring to in the clip I showed earlier. You never know how people are going to react to your art. What he said is basically the life of a filmmaker in a nutshell, especially one as unique as himself. I first became aware of Del Toro when I was a teenager and saw Pan's Labyrinth for the first time. Like everyone, I completely fell in love with this film and I was like, damn, who is the boy genius responsible for this? Then like 2 seconds into my research, I did another thing that everybody else my age did and was like, oh shit, he did Blade 2 and Hellboy. Nice, I guess I've been watching his films longer than I thought. He's made 4 films in the 11 years since Pan's Labyrinth, and 3 of which, Hellboy 2, Pacific Rim, and Crimson Peak, were met with pretty much the same response. I don't know, it's alright, but it's not as good as Pan's Labyrinth. Okay, let's get this out of the way, please. Pan's Labyrinth is one of the greatest films ever made. Most films are not as good as Pan's Labyrinth. Your marriage is not as good as Pan's Labyrinth. Your love for your children is not as good as Pan's Labyrinth. The afterlife is not as good as Pan's Labyrinth. So can we please stop saying this shit? Can we please stop punishing this beautiful angel of a boy for doing something incredible? Thank you. Nobody makes the greatest film of all time on purpose any more than someone makes the worst film of all time on purpose. It just happens. Now, that's not to say that Del Toro just goes about making his films all willy-nilly and some of them just happen to work. He's one of the hardest working people in the business and he knows exactly what he's doing. He knew Pan's Labyrinth was awesome, it's just that little thing, that little sparkle that happens when everything falls into place is what makes something a masterpiece. When you get the right story and it's brought to life by the right crew, with the right cast, with the right Doug Jones, you've got yourself a classic. Getting projects off the ground is difficult for any filmmaker, but especially one who refuses to compromise their vision. Companies want to invest in stories that are commercial, that have a higher probability of making their money back. Del Toro has always had to fight to get his films made because his ideas don't sound like they would appeal to a wider audience. But the thing is that he's never cared that much about appealing to a wider audience.
I think that financial success is not success. You know, to me, when people say, for example, I showed Pan's Labyrinth and somebody said, why don't you take out the violence? And it was very well meaning, why don't you take out the violence so you can reach a wider audience? That's because I don't fucking want a wider audience. I want the audience for the movie. Each movie has an audience. That's it. It's not gonna get more or less if you fuck with it. if you amputate it, if you cripple it. That's all you do. You know, people dream of a bigger audience, and I go, well, you know, yeah, but is it the movie?
Del Toro has made a point of only making the films that he wants to make in the way that he wants to make them, especially since back in the 90s when he worked with the Weinstein Company on Mimic.
My first American experience was almost my last experience because it was with the Weinsteins at Miramax. And I can tell you, two horrible things happened in the late 90s. My father was kidnapped and I worked with the Weinsteins. And I don't know which one was worse. Actually, the kidnapping made more sense. Because I knew what they wanted, you know? And
All of that stress and compromise, and Mimic didn't even really end up doing that well, so Guillermo was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do me from now on, and made what he refers to as his first real movie, The Devil's Backbone. Since then, it would seem as though he's never looked back, only focusing on projects that he's truly passionate about. He even turned down directing Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in favor of doing Hellboy. And yes, I am still very bitter about the fact that Hellboy 3 didn't end up getting made. So sad. Anyway, back to Del Toro's statement about success and failure. Though that statement was mostly in reference to critical reception, that is by no means Del Toro's definition of success. Of course, it's wonderful when people respond well to your work, but it means infinitely more when the thing you're presenting to them is already a success in your eyes.
my favorite movies I've done are Shape of Water, Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, Crimson Peak, Hellboy 2, and Pacific Rim. The rest I can give or take. But those are, I love, and it kind of gave me a second chance at life.
All of these films that were just mentioned were received differently, but in Del Toro's eyes, they're all equal. He loves them all, and in that way, every single one of them is a success. The reception of his last two films are quite different, but just because Crimson Peak didn't do quite as well as The Shape of Water, it doesn't change the way that he feels about either. He loves Crimson Peak, and it's exactly the film that he meant to make, just like The Shape of Water was exactly the film that he meant to make. So, in conclusion, I just want to say thank you, Guillermo del Toro. Thank you for being yourself. Thank you for the Pale Man. Thank you for the Fawn. Thank you for the Angel of Death. And thank you for The Shape of Water. Anytime you knock, I'll answer. Thank you for watching.